Hey everybody, and welcome to today's lesson on multiplying polynomials. Now, for this year, we're only going to be looking at multiplying monomials, but I do have some worksheets on doing binomials by binomials and trinomials by trinomials. So, if you would like to look at what you will be doing in the following years, please let me know, and I have the worksheets ready for you to go. But because we're only going to be looking at multiplying monomials, we'll start with that right now. So the steps for multiplying polynomials is we want to multiply the coefficients, then we want to multiply the variables, so alphabetical order, and then we want to add the exponents. In the example below here, so example A, we have 2 multiplied by 2x. So we want to first multiply the coefficients. Remember, the coefficients are written in front of the variable. So we have our coefficient here, and we're also going to be multiplying it by this. So what it turns out to be is we're going to have 2 multiplied by 2x, what will equal 2 times 2, so we're multiplying the coefficients, so 2 times 2 is 4, and our x attaches onto this. Now, if we had variables, so multiple variables involved in this question, then we would be adding the exponents. But because there's no variable on the first part of this, 2 is just by itself, it's just the 2 times 2, and we're writing down the variable of x. For example, B here, we have a similar type of question where we have 2 multiplied by negative 3x. So what we're doing is multiplying your coefficients. So we're going to have 2 multiplied by negative 3x. So it's the 2 and the negative 3 that are multiplying, and the x is attaching on. So we have 2 multiplied by negative 3, which is negative 6, and our x attaches onto this. I'm going to leave C for you to try on your own because it's a similar type question to the first two, and I want you to check in the OneNote to make sure that you've done it correctly. For D, we now have 2 variables, so we have m and we have n. So we have 2m multiplied by 3n. So remember, the first thing that you want to look at is multiplying the coefficient. Now, 2 times 3 gets us 6, and m multiplied by n, well, they're different variables, so we can't add them together. We're not going to add the exponents together. So what we do is we put m and n down. Remember, it's in alphabetical order, and if they were the same variable, we would be adding the exponents, but because they're different variables, we're putting them down. For E, we have 2x multiplied by 3x. This one here, we have variables that are the same. So our x is the same. So what we want to do is we have 2 multiplied by 3, and then we have an x of 1 and an x of 1, because whenever x is by itself with no exponent written on top, it's to the power of 1. So what we're going to be doing is we're having 2 multiplied by 3, and then we're adding the exponents. So 2 multiplied by 3 equals 6, and then we have x, 1 plus 1, so we get 6x squared. So whenever the variables are the same, you're adding the exponents together, and if the variables are different, then you're just simply writing them down in alphabetical order. Important though you remember that it's alphabetical order you write down the variables. For F, it's a similar type question to E, so I want you to do this one on your own and check the OneNote to make sure you're doing it correctly. For g, now we have 3 parts involved. We're going to follow the same steps though. The first thing that you want to do is multiply the coefficients, and then you want to multiply the variables. Now our variables are x, y, and w, so we want to write these in alphabetical order at the end, and we're not going to be able to add the exponents because the variables are different. So what we're looking at is 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 4, and then we'll have x, y, and w listed after that. So 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 4 equals 24. And then we have in alphabetical order w, x, and y. For h, I'm going to have you do this one on your own. Remember, if there's no coefficient written in front of the variable, it's always a 1. And then look at your variables. In this question, your variables are the same, so that means you're adding the exponents together. You're also going to do I and j on your own so that you have some more practice. And I'm going to be doing K with you because it's a different type of questions we haven't talked about. So this one here, we have 2 parts to this. We want to treat this part first and this part first, then we're going to be going into the subtraction. So we're going to be following our order of operations. So we want to follow brackets, exponents, division, multiplication. So we have multiplication. Then we're looking at adding or subtraction. So subtraction will be the last part that we're working with. Just like before, we're dealing with the coefficients first. So in this part here, if we have 3 times 2, we get 6, and we have x and x, so we'd be adding the exponents together. When they're not written down, they're always a 1. So x plus 1, or 1 plus 1, we get 2, and there's no other y, so we just simply write the y down. Then we have our second part of this, where we have 6x multiplied by x, y. There's no coefficient written here, so it's going to be a 1. So 6 times 1 is still 6. And then we have an x and an x, so adding that together, we get x squared and only one y, so we write that down. The last thing we want to do is our subtraction. Well, if you notice, we have 6x squared y and 6x squared y, so these are going to cancel each other off, and our final answer is going to be 0. Now, looking at multiplying a polynomial by a monomial, what this means is we're going to have a multiplication inside, so 1 multiplying all the way inside. So the a multiplies by the b, and then the a multiplies by the c. So what this will get us will be ab plus ac. Same thing will be happening below when it's a subtraction inside the brackets. A multiplies in, a multiplies in, so we'd have a multiplied by b, so ab, subtract a multiplied by c, so ac. And I'll just write over on the side here, just as a reminder, that the arrows mean multiplication. Now, when we're doing multiplying a polynomial by a monomial, this is called distributive properties. Called this because you're distributing the a within the brackets. So you're getting ab and ac. Let's do an example here. So we have 3 on the outside, and then inside the brackets we have x subtract 5. So this 3 has to multiply in and multiply in. What this gets us is 3 multiplied by x is 3x. x, because remember, if there's nothing written in front of the variable, it's always a 1, so 3 times 1 would be 3. And then we have our negative, and we have a negative 5 multiplied by 3 gets us negative 15. Remember, if you have two negatives, it becomes a positive. So if we had a negative 3 multiplied by negative 5, it would end up being a positive 15. For B, exact same type of question as above. So I want you to do this one on your own. For C, this is exactly what I was talking about when we have two negatives. So let's look at what happens here. We have negative 4 multiplying in on the x and also multiplying in on the negative 2. So negative 4 multiplied by 1x gives me negative 4x. Negative 4 multiplied by negative 2 gives me positive 8. So remember our rules that if you have two negatives, it becomes a positive. For D, we have a negative on the outside of the brackets, and we have 3x subtract 2 inside the brackets. If there's no number listed with this negative, what it is a negative 1 always. So negative 1 multiplying in, well, 1 times anything is still itself. The only thing that's going to happen is this negative is going to change all of the symbols. So the negative is going to multiply in on the 3x and also in on the negative 2, changing the 3x to negative 3x and changing the negative 2 to positive 2. E, I want you to try this now. So multiply that negative through to make sure you get the correct answer. F, well, let's take a look at this question here. What type of question do we have? If we have a break in between, so the 7 isn't right up next to the bracket, it has an addition or a subtraction in between that, we no longer have a multiplication question. What we have here is a subtraction question. And we know that when we're looking at a subtraction question, what we want to do is change the symbols for everything inside the bracket. So then it becomes negative p squared, subtract 2p plus 1. I'm going to do this one vertically, so we'd have negative p squared, subtract 2p plus 1, and then we have 7 on the outside. Putting this all together, well, all that we're going to have affected is this first part here. So 1 plus 7 will get us 8, and it's a positive 8. And the rest is just going to simply come down because there's nothing outside the bracket that's going to be affecting it. So we'd have negative p squared subtract 2p. And that would be our final answer. So remember, if your number is not right up next to the bracket, it is not a multiplication question. For G, I'm going to leave for you to do as well as H. Going over to the next page, we're going to have a look at I here. So we have two parts that we have to deal with. We have to multiply the variable through the bracket here and multiply this variable through the bracket here. Then the last part we're going to deal with is the addition. So remember, you're following the order of operations. The first thing we need to do is the distributive property, which is distributing that variable through it. So we're going to have x multiplied by x when there's no number in front of your variable. So your coefficient would be 1 here. So we have 1 times 1, which is still 1. But because our variable is the same, we're adding our exponents, which are both 1. So we get x squared. Next, we have x multiplied by negative 2. So we get negative 2x. second part of this equation, we have 3x multiplied by x, which gets us 3, because it's 3 times 1, and then x multiplied by x, well, the exponents are 1 and 1, so we get x squared. And then we have 3x multiplied by negative 8. Well, 3 times 8 equals, 3 times negative 8 equals negative 24. And then x multiplied, and there's no variable there, so we're just writing it down. So we have now an addition question of x squared subtract 2x plus 3x squared subtract 24x. If we organize it with the like terms together, we have x squared plus 3x subtract 2x subtract 24x. We can combine. So, oops, I forgot my squared on that one. We have x squared plus 3x squared, which gets us 4x squared. And then we have negative 2x subtract 24x, which gets us negative 26x. And that would be our final answer. Now we're going to take a look at subtraction. So always check if you can combine like terms after you remove the brackets, which is what we just did above. So it's always important, when possible, to put it in its simplest form by combining the like terms. Now, when we're subtracting, we want to remember to distribute, then add the opposite, and last is combining like terms. So looking at this problem here, we have to first distribute the 4 within. So it's going to be going on to the 2x squared, onto the negative 3x, and onto the 2, and then distribute for this bracket as well. Then we're going to be looking at adding the opposite because it is a subtraction question. You can tell that by looking at the negative 2 within the 2 sets of brackets there. And then the last thing is combining like terms. So we first want to deal with this beginning. So the 4 multiplied by 2x squared. Well, 4 multiplied by 2x squared is 4 times 2, which is 8, and there's no variable on the 4, so it's just 8x squared. Next, we have 4 multiplied by negative 3x. Remember, there's no variable on the 4, so it's just going to be the 4 multiplied by the negative 3, which is negative 12x. And then we have 4 multiplied by 2, which is positive 8. So that'll be that portion. We need to distribute for the second portion. And there's one of 2 ways that you can do this. So you can either do negative 2 multiplied by everything, or you can multiply it by 2 and then change all of the symbols at the end. If you multiply it by negative 2, though, it changes the symbols for you. So you're always adding the opposite. So that's the way that I'm going to show you how to do it. So if we multiply x squared by negative 2, what we get is negative 2x squared. Then negative 2 multiplied by negative 3x, we get positive 6x. And then we get negative 2 multiplied by positive 3, and we get negative 6. So you can see by multiplying it by the negative 2, it has changed all the symbols for us. So what we want to do now is we want to add them together. We can either do this left to right, or we can do this vertically. Now, because this is a longer expression, I am going to do this vertically. So we have our first portion, which was this, our second portion, which was this, and we're adding it together. So we have 8x squared subtract 12x plus 8, and that's going to be over top of negative 2x squared plus 6x subtract 6. Now ours worked out perfect that our like terms are already over top of each other, but if yours aren't, you have to make sure to organize it that your x squared is over top of your x squared, your x is over your x, and then your constants are over top of each other. So we have 8 subtract 6 here, which gets us positive 2. We have negative 12x plus 6x, which gets us negative 6x. And then we have 8x squared, subtract 2x squared, which gets us 6x squared. So our final answer will be 6x squared subtract 6x plus 2. So remember, we followed exactly what we wrote up here. So when we're subtracting, we first distribute, then we add the opposite. So you can either multiply it by our number and then change the symbol afterwards, or we can multiply it by that negative 2, which changed the symbols for us, and then we combine our like terms at the end. So what I want you to do is do K on your own and check the class notebook to make sure that you've got the correct answers. And as always, if you have any questions, please ask me in class or send me a message on Teams.